African time, and of course the time in India, is Uncovering the Mysteries of the Christmas Star, a presentation especially developed for Balajid and team at Reasons to Believe APAC, December 2024. For those of you who are interested in some of my work and some of the work of our team, I head up, as Balajid said, Reasons to Believe Africa. And if you just use your phone for a moment, your mobile phone, and scan the QR code, it'll lead you to our website, which is reasonsafrica.org. And you can be a partaker of the grandeur and the splendor of revealing God through the book of science, to use one of the phrases of Galileo Galilei. The night sky, the day sky, fills us with innumerable mysteries and innumerable astronomical events, such as this one, an eclipse of the sun. And for centuries and millennia, people have looked up in awe and in wonder at astronomical events by day, such as eclipses, as you see here, and then by night. And there are many questions, myriads of questions, which people ask over the weeks, months, years, decades, and millennia. So an eclipse of the sun is just one, of course. It's seen by millions of people. I remember being with Hugh Ross and team in the USA on people turned their eyes skyward and were absolutely bedazzled by the grandeur and by the splendor of this eclipse of the sun. And then, of course, there's just the closest body to the earth, the moon. And I think of that incredible hymn sung around the world. I've got it here in German as well as in English. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. And so we've got the sun in the first slide, juxtaposed with the moon. Here we have the moon in its own right, and again, an absolute wonder to behold. And then, of course, in our skies by night, we also have the aurora borealis, or the dancing northern lights, invariably seen from high latitudes, such as within the Arctic Circle. And so this sets the backdrop of a very majestic theater, a very majestic astronomical theater, which captivates our attention. The aurora borealis, seen again here, captures our imagination, both in spirit and in intellect, both in spirit and in wonder and in awe of the grandeur of God's creation. But, of course, there is one event that Balajid and team have invited me to focus on tonight, and that is the Star of Bethlehem, or the Christmas star. And here's a typical postcard scene or Christmas card scene where you view three wise men seeing Jesus at the manger, and the shepherds are there. And I will prove to you that this is unfortunately all theologically false, to have the wise men viewing Jesus, the baby Jesus, in a manger. All of that's tradition, but is theologically incorrect, as I shall prove presently. Here in South Africa, we speak about, I think, 11 different languages, and we've got silent night here in Zulu. Good night. Everything is quiet in the town of Bethlehem. Rembrandt, the great painter Rembrandt, depicted the visitation of the wise men to Mary and to Emmanuel, God in the flesh. And here you see the wise men coming to the baby Jesus, being held in the arms by Mary, his earthly mother. But again, I will show you that this is theologically incorrect. In fact, in the distance, you've even got the donkeys and the camels and so on. All of this is theologically wrong, to have the wise men in the manger. You can see the straw and the wheat. And I'll prove why it is wrong. But very, very few people know these facts, which I shall unravel to all of you as time progresses. So the question I wish to propose to all of you is this. Tradition tells us that the wise men followed the star, found a baby Jesus in a manger. But I'm adding a question mark to that because I'm saying the wise men did not find a baby. The wise men found a young child aged 2, and Jesus was not in a manger anymore. He was in a house. And of course, all of that is in the scriptures, but it rather shakes one from the traditional Christmas postcard scenario. So let's just jump into the scriptures, which Balajud and the team at RTB APAC adore so much. And let's read, first of all, Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. There came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. Very interesting. Jerusalem, the Jewish city. If ever there's a Jewish city, it is Jerusalem. And here the wise men come from the east to Jerusalem. Jerusalem. Why were they coming to Jerusalem? And how long did it take them to get from the east to Jerusalem? Well, here's a beautiful photograph of the eternal city, if you like, of Jerusalem. And in Matthew chapter 2, and I'm reading from the Message just to make things very easy for those for whom English is not perhaps their first mother tongue. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem village, so Jesus was born in Bethlehem. This was during Herod's kingship. A band of scholars arrived in Jerusalem from the east. They asked, where can we find and pay homage? And they say, to the newborn King of the Jews. You know, Christmas, in terms of worshiping Emmanuel, God in the flesh, is very much a Jewish feast, or should be a Jewish feast, because we are celebrating the birth not only of our King, but of the King of the Jews. Herod then arranges a secret meeting with the scholars from the east, and he basically asks them, let me read it for you. Herod then arranged a secret meeting with the scholars from the east, pretending to be as devout as they were. He got them to tell him exactly when the birth announcement star appeared. Then he told them the prophecy about Bethlehem and said, go find this child. He doesn't say go find this baby. He says go and find this child. Leave no stone unturned. As soon as you find him, send word, and I'll join you at once in your worship, quote unquote. That's from Matthew 2. Now, a very detailed reading of Matthew 2 proves, and we'll look at this carefully, is that Jesus was a young child, about 2 years old, when the Magi visited him. In other words, the Magi followed the Star of Bethlehem for about 2 years and found Jesus in a house. That's very scriptural. If you look at Matthew chapter 2 and verse 11, and I'll read from the King James Version, we read, and when they were coming to the house, not the manger, the wise men never came into the manger. When they were coming to the house, they saw, not the baby, but they saw the young child in the house with Mary, his mother. So here is very clear evidence that Jesus was a young child. But how do we know that he was about 2 years old? Well, I'm reading again Matthew chapter 2. Herod, when he realized that the scholars had tricked him, flew into a rage. He commanded, and listen very carefully, he commanded the murder of every little boy, not baby. He commanded the murder of every little boy 2 years old and younger who lived in Bethlehem and its surrounding hills. He determined that age from information he had secured from the scholars. And so there are paintings which depict what we call the massacre of the innocents Here we see a scene by Leon Cognier of this massacre of the innocents. What this means is that Herod orders the murder of every young Jewish boy 2 years and younger, according to the timings as suggested as described by the wise men. Note the bare feet of the terrified mother, and notice her face of greatest anguish clutching her little boy around 2 years old, as you can hear the feet of Herod's soldiers about to step into her house and kill her young Jewish boy. So who then found Jesus in a manger in Bethlehem? It was not the Magi. In fact, it was the shepherds. And here's a glorious depiction by Berkham, Nicholas Berkham. He died in 1683. Oh, holy night. You know the hymn very well. The shepherds find Emmanuel in a manger. The shepherds find Emmanuel in a manger. The wise men find Jesus or Emmanuel in a house aged about 2 years old. So what was the Star of Bethlehem? Well, scientific suggestions for the Star of Bethlehem include 4 possibilities to start with. A comet. Was it a comet? Was it a lineup of the planets? Was it a nova? Was it a supernova? Or was it a miracle? Well, there are some descriptions of the star which you mustn't forget. We read in Matthew 2, verse 9, and I'll read this. When they heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them. So the star moved in a very curious way till it came and stood over again where the young child was. And all this is in full accord with how I've explained the age of Jesus at this point. The earthly age of the Lord is about 2 years old. So let's start off with a comet. Well, comets are beautiful objects in our night skies. I will show you images of a few very famous comets. This was a comet named after Richard West, whom I knew very well, Comet West. And it's got a magnificent head and long myriads of long flowing tails. Then there was a comet called Ikiyasiki. Again, this magnificent comet in the sky with its head towards the lower regime or domain of our screens, and then those long flowing tails. And here's an image of one of my favorite comets called Hale-Bopp, Comet Hale-Bopp, in 1995. It was taken in 1997, this image. And again, you can imagine that this instills the greatest of awe, fear, and mystery within people, especially 1,000 years ago and earlier, who might behold such objects in the night sky. In fact, Halley's comet is perhaps the most famous comet of all. And here we have Comet Halley and the Bayeux Tapestry, from a scene dated April 1066, which of course was just after the coronation of Harold. And you can see Harold being coronated here, crowned, and you can see above the Latin word stella. You can see a comet. If you look at the people on the left, they're pointing at the comet with their heads directed away from the comet in absolute fear and trepidation. So for multitudes of people, the appearance of comets heralded either something terrifying, something terrestrially very important, something really great, or something very foreboding. That was the viewpoint of comets at the time, although we now have a very detailed understanding of these objects which circle the sun. And so what are comets? Comets are dirty snowballs, meaning of ice mixed with rock and dust. So you've got rock, dust, water ice, and it forms, and some other elements which you see here, well known in the periodic table, compounds also such as methane and ammonia, and That's what a comet is. It's a dirty snowball of ice mixed with dust, rock. As it comes close to the sun, the ice starts evaporating because it gets hotter. And as it evaporates, it creates those long, flowing tails. As comets approach the sun, the snowball partially begins to melt, as I've said, creating the most exquisite tails of gas and dust. And you can see the incredible and intricate structure of these cometary tails. They're normally not only one, there might be myriads and especially multitudes of thin gaseous filaments streaming away from the head or the head of the comet, which is this dirty snowball of ice mixed with cosmic dust. The most famous comet in all of history is undoubtedly Comet Halley, 240 BC sightings, and maybe as early as 467 BC. But for many reasons, the Star of Bethlehem was not a comet. First and foremost, it appeared, was seen on Earth in 12 BC. Now, just to set the record straight here, we use the Gregorian calendar. Theologians estimate Jesus was born using our calendar in around 7 BC. Most theologians agree that it was about 7 BC, which demarcated the birth of which signified the birth of our Lord. This one appears too early, 12 BC, and also doesn't behave in the way described in Matthew chapter 2. So there's another view of a comet. And now this is terribly interesting. If you look at the top of this painting by Giotto di Bondone, you see Comet Halley. And who's at the bottom? He's got the wise men coming to the manger, quote unquote, and he's got Halley's comet as the Star of Bethlehem. So he interpreted the Star of Bethlehem as being Comet Halley in this incredible image called The Life of Christ, Adoration of the Magi. So comets are not only visible to a select few, they're seen by multitudes of people, such as, at the coronation of Harold and the entire UK populace, and so on and so on and so on. And also comets just simply don't stand still, as foretold in Matthew chapter 2. So we can really rule out the cometary hypothesis. But this one is terribly interesting. Beloved, here you've got a lineup of the planets. Could the Star of Bethlehem have been a lineup, especially of major planets like Jupiter with Saturn? And by a lineup, I mean in projection, not a kiss, close one-on-one, but in projection to be in very close proximity one to the other one. So let's examine this carefully as a possible explanation of the Star of Bethlehem. We call them planetary conjunctions, and here you see planets in close proximity, two of them, Jupiter and Venus and the Moon. And you can imagine 2,000 years ago, if people saw something like this, they might well imagine that something of tremendous terrestrial importance was actually occurring or about to occur on terra firma. So could the Star of Bethlehem have involved a lineup of the planets, possibly, say, Jupiter with Saturn? Well, here you have that specific scenario, Jupiter aligning with Saturn in projection, not in actual orbit, but in projection. Jupiter, of course, being closer to us and Saturn being further afield, but in projection, a sort of almost close cosmic encounter. What would that look like? Well, that is a tremendous sight to behold. I wish to show you what's called the Great Conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. I'm just having a sip of my juice. On December the 21st, 2020, so 4 years ago. And if you have Jupiter lining up with Saturn in this way, anyone endowed with any degree of wisdom might have said 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, wow, there's something not specially happening somewhere on the globe. Now, In 1603, the great astronomer Kepler saw this. He saw Jupiter and Saturn lining up, very closely so. And here is an actual diagram by the famous astronomer Johannes Kepler. This diagram is dated October 17, 1604, and you see Jupiter and Saturn in close proximity in the sky. Now, Kepler actually calculated that Jupiter and Saturn were in very close proximity in 7 BC. This is extremely interesting, that Jupiter and Saturn, two extremely bright planets, especially Jupiter, would have occurred to be very close in the sky in projection in around 7 BC. And in fact, more than that, it was called the triple conjunction by astronomers. What does a triple conjunction mean? A triple planetary conjunction means that the planets meet and separate 3 times over a period of a few months. This is terribly important. So you have Jupiter almost aligning with Saturn, then parting ways again, then lining up, then parting ways, then lining up in projection, and then parting ways. This is very interesting. And Kepler suggested that the Star of Bethlehem was this triple planetary conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn meeting, quote unquote. There are problems with this, but not too serious. A planetary conjunction would have been evident to all, but that's true, and yet it would be evident to those with a trained eye. I don't think King Herod, if he went out, would have observed anything unusual. But to a trained eye, those endowed with trained and astute astronomical eyes, they would be very keenly aware of perhaps something special happening in the skies. So I wouldn't just rule it out on the fact that it would have been evident to all, because it does need a skilled eye. There's also a minor problem too. The meaning of standing still is something which needs to be examined. But I do find Kepler's explanation rather ingenious. We might seek other astronomical explanations, such as a new star. Now, astronomers delineate the appearance of a new star using the word nova for new star. And basically what happens is a star or 2 stars actually, which are very faint, are circling one another, and gas is flowing from the one to the other, and the luminosity of the star increases by about 50,000 to 100,000 times as bright as the sun. So suddenly to the ancient eye, there would be a star there, whereas before there wasn't a star there, because it's suddenly almost exploding, not quite exploding, but rising. There is a gradient in the luminosity output of the gas in such objects, these novae or new stars. And of course, might a nova explain the Star of Bethlehem? Again, this is theologically incorrect, because you've got 3 wise men coming to a manger, which we've now seen from Scripture is not true. But I want to not focus on that anymore. I want to focus on that very bright star above the manger. And what was it? So one possibility still remains, this triple planetary conjunction of Jupiter with Saturn. But could it have been a new star? We've photographed many such new stars. This is Nova Hercules 2021, imaged in June 2021. And suddenly you see a very bright star in the Milky Way, whereas before there was apparently no star, or a very, very faint star. Here's another nova, the very famous nova of 1901 called GK Persei. And again, you can imagine if you, an ancient scholar, and you're looking up at something like this, and there was no star, and suddenly there's a nova or a new star increasing in luminosity by 50 to 100,000 times, you might wonder if that was not actually the Star of Bethlehem. But we can rule out the nova hypothesis because they don't last as long as 2 years. A nova increases in luminosity and then decreases again. We've also looked at the possibility of, was the Star of Bethlehem a supernova? Well, here's an image which I secured many years ago now, and you're welcome to look at some of my other astronomy images by scanning that QR code I gave you at the beginning of my talk, and which I'll repeat again at the end of my presentation. But this is an image I took of the Via Lactea, the Milky Way, containing 100,000 billion stars, counting 1 star per second, takes 2,500 years, and many of these stars, as they reach the end of their life cycles, might explode into what astronomers call a supernova. Not just nova for new star, but a supernova. The most famous one is the Crab Nebula in the constellation of Taurus. It's the remains of a stellar explosion, which was seen in the year 1054 AD. You can imagine again, wise men from the east seeing something as luminous as this. Could the Star of Bethlehem have been a supernova? And here are, X-ray, optical, and infrared composites of the Kepler supernova, which I introduced you to, seen in 1604. Other supernovae have been seen in the sky, such as this one, SN 1987A. But again, the point is this could not have demarcated the Star of Bethlehem for many reasons. It doesn't last for 2 years. It doesn't stand still. Cass A is a very famous example of a supernova, Cassiopeia A, a supernova remnant in the constellation of Cassiopeia. But again, on various astronomical grounds, which I've already alluded to, this would not be true of an object leading people across the desert sands for a period of around 2 years. There's another point here, and that is a true supernova. If it was really a hugely bright supernova, astronomers might argue that it would be visible to everyone. The Star of Bethlehem was not visible to King Herod. He didn't know where to go. He sent the wise men to look and find Jesus in a house. He didn't know where to go himself. So it was not seen by everyone, the Star of Bethlehem. So supernovae would be visible, exploding stars would be visible to all. The duration is certainly not one for 2 years. And then there's also this other curious mention in Matthew 2 that this supernova, or rather the Star of Bethlehem, stands still over the house where the young child was. So again, I can quite confidently rule out the supernova hypothesis. So where does this leave us, beloved? Well, the description given in Matthew 2 is simply too fragmentary for me as a professor of astronomy and applied mathematics to give you a precise astronomical explanation. Bottom line is, I don't know. There's nobody on earth who knows what the Star of Bethlehem actually was for a fact. We have clues, and I find the explanation by Kepler of a triple planetary conjunction very attractive. And I'm also very aware, if you've listened to me in the crossing with Balajid and RTB APAC, God and Galileo, that the Bible is not a scientific text. Very important. Baronius said, the Bible teaches us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. You don't consult the Bible if you have a growth, say, on your ear or a problem with your inner ear. You consult a specialist who doesn't consult the Bible or the scriptures. The Bible is never meant to be a scientific textbook, but what we see in Reasons to Believe APAC and Africa and Reasons to Believe US is the wonderful harmony between the spiritual side of mankind and the book of science, the book of nature, the harmony between the Bible leading us, showing us the way to salvation, and then leading one's life as a creative scientist. So one possibility remains to me, and that is a triple planetary conjunction, or you look at the Milky Way galaxy spewing out hundreds of thousands of millions of stars. One thing we do know is that it signified, the Star of Bethlehem signified possibly, or not possibly, the most, undoubtedly is the English word, the most significant event for God to become man. Elizabeth Jennings pens it this way. Allow me to read it if I may. He is so small, the stars bow down. The fierce winds ease their breath, and careful shepherds look upon the one unsullied birth. They kneel and stare, while time seems gone, and goodness rules the earth. The blight or the curse on mankind is all undone, and there will be no death. For though this child will be nailed on a cross, he'll be so since he is the jewel of untold worth. For him all stars have shone. And I think that it's terribly important, the last two sentences of this incredible poem. Jesus is the jewel of untold worth. For him all stars have shone. So while I cannot give you a definitive answer as to what the Star of Bethlehem was, because information is just too fragmentary, we do know that we are celebrating, as Balajuta so eloquently said, the birth of Jesus, Emmanuel, God in the flesh. The blight on mankind is all undone. He is the jewel of untold worth. And so people have asked me over time, couldn't the Star of Bethlehem just have been a miracle where God simply puts a star in the sky for a period of around 2 years? Of course God can do that. If God can create 100,000 million stars in the Via Lactea or the Milky Way alone, of course God can hang a star in the sky. But my favorite hunch is to try and find an astronomical explanation for the Star of Bethlehem, although I do want to say something, if I may. Physics does break down in certain instances in the New Testament, and in fact, not in certain instances. All miracles cannot be scientifically explained as follows. If you look at Jesus walking on water in point number one, there are no physical laws to describe this. Any human being trying to walk on water will sink. There are no physical laws to explain Jesus healing the eyes of a man born blind. There are no physical laws to explain my personal encounter with Jesus of Nazareth, which occurred in the year 1976 when I was 22 years of age. So I'm very aware that in the spiritual realm, we keep on living in a realm of miracles. We really do. We pray for someone who is ill, and God touches them by his grace. It's incredible to read the New Testament and to see whenever Jesus performs an earthly miracle, such as the multiplication of the bread or the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, feeding 5,000 people, you can't explain that using physical laws, using scientific laws. So I'm very aware that the Star of Bethlehem could have been a miracle, although as an astronomer, I'm eager to try and see if there aren't any astronomical explanations. And we are going through this in our presentation. But what I do want to say is this. We must not forget the miracle of Christmas. That is a miracle where God becomes man. We think of the virgin birth. And as a Jew, I'm aware of other miracles, such as the leading of the Israelites with a supernatural light, columns, if you like, pillars of light at night, as in Exodus 13 and verse 21. So the Star of Bethlehem could have been just a supernatural event. And I put here, when God became man, John 1 verse 14, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things, including all stars, were made by him, and not any one thing that was made without him. And then in verse 14, and the Word became flesh and tabernacled amongst us. So let's think of my moment of moving from darkness to light. I do not know how Jesus saved my soul in 1976, but he did. Prior to me encountering Jesus and his love and his grace, I was spiritually dead. Had I died in a car accident just before I accepted him, I would be in only one place, and that is the place of eternal separation from God. I shudder to think of it, but it's very true. I'm very aware of that. I nearly had a motor car accident before 1976, nearly, driving to a city in South Africa called Pretoria. And I know I was spiritually dead. I didn't know that God existed. But by his grace, by his amazing grace, he revealed himself to me in 1976. I was 22. My soul felt its worth, and I moved from spiritual death to eternal light and eternal life. So I've given you some possibilities of what the Star of Bethlehem might and might not have been. But you might say to me, as we celebrate Christmas, as Balajud has mentioned, what are some take-home lessons for you and me? You are sitting in Uganda, you're sitting in India, perhaps listening to me from the United States. What are some take-home lessons? Now, this is very important. I've never seen these in book form before. They are mine as given by the Lord to me. And I'd like to just elucidate, if I may. Do not act until the Holy Spirit tells you to do so. Do not act until you see your star. You see, I cannot tell you when to act. I cannot tell you where to act. I cannot tell you how to act. And you might say to me, Professor Block, I believe God is sending me, say, to Kolkata. Well, I'll say to you, has God spoken to you about Kolkata? Has he actually spoken to you? And you say, Professor Block, yes, he has. Well, then my advice to you is if he says, go here or go to Taiwan or go to Korea or wherever God might say, we must not do that until we have evidence in our spirits, that deep evidence in our spirits, that it's God actually speaking. People come to me and might say to me, David, we believe the Lord has said A, B, C, D, E. Well, unless God has told me that, I don't act at all. But if God tells me to give $1,000 to somebody, I will do it with pleasure. Because God tells me. A person can come to me and say, I need $1,000 from you. And I'll say, well, God hasn't told me that. And so I will not give a cent. But as my beloved son Nathaniel, who's with me handling the technical side here in South Africa, knows, I will gladly part with many of my earthly possessions, provided God has said, do it. But I will not act. No, it doesn't matter how loud the noises are or the emails are or the pleading is. Oh, I'm so poor or I'm so needy and so on and so on. I will not act. But if I know that God says, David, help person A, B, C, D, or E, I gladly do so because I only act, I try to only act when I see my star. In other words, the star being the peace of God, the presence of God in my life. And then secondly, always remember in your Christian walk that the Magi followed the star. They were led by the Star of Bethlehem. They were not driven. This is terribly important. Are you led in your Christian walk tonight, or are you driven in your Christian walk tonight? How do we know the difference? Well, think of Jesus driving out the demons of the man in Gadara, and he casts the demons into the swine. The swine drive the pigs to their death. Allow me to say that again. The swine drive the pigs to their death. The slope was downhill. The pigs ran down the hill. They ran, so the speed was very fast. And see, the end is always death. When you are driven, and I know this to be so true myself, if in a certain project I'm driven and not led, I'm anxious, I'm fearful, I know I'm not acting in the perfect will of God. I might be trying to find scriptures to help me along to believe that I'm acting in the will of God, But you will know that you know that you know that you know that you're either acting in the will of God or in the flesh. It's as easy as that. And so I often tell students, and my beloved students and people I lecture to, is that when you are driven, the slope is downhill, the speed is fast, and see the end is death. Whereas if you follow the Lord, it is as Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. There's another take-home lesson from the Star of Bethlehem, and that is this. The wise men were in the right place at the right time. Now, you can be at the right place at the wrong time. For example, if you're catching a train, you can be sitting at the train station, you're at the right place, but you're at the wrong time, and there's no train, because you're at the right place at the wrong time. I think many Christians, make this mistake of being at the right place at the wrong time, or the wrong place at the wrong time. You can have both of those possibilities. I remember as a little boy, my beloved mother taking me to the station in Krugersdorp, a town where I was born. We used to often catch trains, and you have to be at the right time and at the right place to catch the train. And so that's another important lesson I pray that might be a real blessing to you tonight at RTB APAC, is that you must be in the right place at the right time. Another take-home lesson is this. The evidence of the star was not seen by King Herod. I've said that many times, only by the wise men. And following a star will lead to blessing. Being driven by the devil himself will lead to severe angst, heart attacks, fatigue, and not knowing where you are heading. It's as simple as that, beloved. Is it true, even of my soul, that the Lord is my shepherd, that I shall not want? He leadeth me. There you go. He leadeth me in green pastures. Right there in Psalm 23 in the second verse, he leadeth me. Not he driveth me, he leadeth me. And then also, as we've said, to be led by the Spirit of the Lord. Jesus, let us remember, was in the world. The world was made by him. The world knew him not. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But to those who receive him, he gives the power to become the sons of God. And a fifth lesson about the wise men is this. Don't store up treasures. And the word is store up. For example, I, from time to time, purchase photographic equipment. But then there's a time for that equipment to go, for me to renew that equipment. I'm a great lover of books. I love to read old books. I adore old books. But I'm not storing up treasures in the sense that I also love to give away. I might use a book or a camera lens for a time, and then it's time for that object or that lens or that book to bless other people. Jesus says, do not store up for yourself. Store up treasures on earth where thieves break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The wise men gave of their best. They gave gold, gifts of gold, gifts of frankincense, gifts of myrrh. They gave. And my wife just keeps on reminding me of the great blessing to give, and it shall be given unto you. Not that we give to immediately receive in return, but we give to bless others. We are not to store up treasures, not only earthly treasures, but can't we give away a smile or a hug or a word of encouragement or a word of grace at this Christmas season? I think of the great fire at the cathedral in France, Notre Dame Cathedral, and within some hours, this incredible cathedral was almost partially razed to the ground. Fire can take away our earthly treasures just like that. Fire is devastating. My co-author, Kenneth Freeman, who was the co-author of Garden Galileo, lost all his earthly possessions in the fire. Forest fires came in over Canberra and razed his house. and multitudes of other houses to the ground. That's why we're not to store up, we're to have to give away by God's grace. And so if you wish to follow me any further, I am available on Facebook, David Block, just David Block in Facebook. I'm also on Twitter, but Facebook is the way. And here, if you scan this QR code, it'll show you how my team and I are working to reach not only with apologetics within the continent of Africa, was recently in Kenya with my wife Liz, just been to Namibia, but I've also just been to Chile. And if you wish to follow me around, trotting around the globe from time to time, revealing God through science, just take note of that QR code, scan it, or otherwise just note that the QR code will take you to www.reasonsafrica.org. That's reasonsafrica.org. And there you can even download for free a PDF of one of my books called Our Universe, Accident or Design. And in that book, I argue that the universe is beautifully designed by God. And so it fits in so beautifully with the Star of Bethlehem, whatever it was, an object, no doubt, designed and held in the veritable hand of God. And that brings me to the conclusion before Q&A of uncovering the mysteries of the Christmas star, developed and presented especially for Balajit and team at RTB APAC, with the greatest vote of thanks and immense appreciation to everyone listening this evening.